difficult and a new strategy are needed. And as you say, HIV is more than just an infection, is also a politics and a moral and ethic consideration. And I was a bit sad to see that even in some part of some African country, some African people are against gay men, are against many things. And as you know, by the African legislature in two or three countries, death penalty for people being seen as gay men. And it's very difficult politically. And some of these countries use decolonization strategy, saying that gay was imported by French or British, and it makes the global response even more difficult, complex, and we have to be subtle in the way we speak to government or policy makers. But go to the core of what we fight. Even we fought HIV persists due to host factor. Also, more you treat early, smaller is your reservoir. It depends of the CD8 function, the cells that make clean infected CD4 T cell. There is an immediate response by interferon, which is a stronger antiviral natural product in the body that can be produced in 1 or 2 days versus the T cells that may help to control, but in 2 to 3 weeks. So we need these two type of response to control early, within days or within weeks, HIV replication. Surprisingly, over 20 years, more you are inflamed by anything, more is your reservoir or larger is your reservoir. And if you change type of medication, as far as your viral load is zero or undetectable, the type of medication doesn't seem, at least today, to make any change on the reservoir size. And smaller is your reservoir. If you stop heart, it may take, if the reservoir is big, 2 months to rebound. Big reservoir is within 1 or 2 weeks. If the reservoir is very small, it can be 1, 6, 9 months to come back. So the time to rebound is linked to the low reservoir, which may be linked to the good immune pressure against the reservoir. So that's the classical data. What we did with Nicolas Chaumont and published, it was 13th of April, I make an error, it's April, so 3 days ago, we find a new marker to define the size of reservoir because it's still difficult to measure. You need cell, you need special technology. If you have a simple blood marker, a cytokine like GDF15, which is the growth differentiation factor 15. It is a stress cytokine, so a stress hormone, which is already known to be elevated in cancer, in cardiac disease, during pregnancy if you have nausea, and during acute or chronic infection. And we look at this marker and we show that this marker was associated with not all the inflammatory marker, but some specific one. The SUPAR has been shown by our US colleague to be the best marker for non-AIDS event. It can predict years in advance if you are at risk of cardiovascular, cancer, renal disease due to the inflammation. So SUPAR is considered as the best marker. A simple blood test predicts clinical inflammatory syndrome in people being aviremic and doing well. And you can see the other marker was GLP-1, which is the Ozempic type of medication. So surprisingly, our marker, we show predict size of reservoir, but was linked with the global non-AIDS marker predictor and also on fat obesity, diabetic marker, GLP-1. So let's see the association with the reservoir. And for that, we took two cohorts, one from McGill, one from the University of Montreal, so within Montreal's two university. And you can see a line, more you have the plasma GLP-15, more you have integrate HIV DNA, so the reservoir in the core of the nucleus of the CD4 T cell done by Nicolas Chaumont. And you can see that we find exactly the same relationship with different cohorts, making, to our knowledge and to the journal publication, the best marker for the reservoir. But we learn that this best marker is linked to diabetic or food appetite marker, Ozempic pathway, and to the non-AIDS event, making like an integration between global health in the body and the size of reservoir, which is, I think, very important. And this is due to the innate immunity, to the immunity that's play within days or hours after infection, and not the T cells that we show 20 years ago. It was a T cell dependent reservoir, and now is independent of low CD4, low nadir, low CD4 CD8 ratio. It doesn't fit. It just fit with monocytes, so the regular cells that keep immune system. So based on that, we can now infer or fight with more knowledge. Of course, it can be directly a viral or cellular strategy. So if the virus remain in certain cell, you can play with the virus. Either you ask the virus to go out of the cell to be seen by the immune system, or to lock in, like to block in the genome, so he cannot move, he's prisoner, he's frozen. So that's two aspects of viral intervention. And if you more on a cellular strategy, like me being an hematologist, you can increase the immune fight, the immune cell, and then they can eat the infected cell if they see the virus. So likely we need the combo of the two to have a good outcome. So let's see what we have now. So from the past, we know from a Nobel Prize that anti-PD-1, the medication used in 50%, 50% of all cancer chemotherapy. Now it's called the immunotherapy of cancer, the big one. Pembrolizumab, the most used from Merck company. And that's the slide from the Nobel Prize. So you remove a break. When there is a persistent cancer, a persistent infection, the body have to make a deal with the enemy. Otherwise, you have a cytokine storm and you may die in 2 or 3 weeks, like in very severe COVID, or you play down if you don't clean the cancer of the infection by having a cooling down system, the compromise, I call it, it's called PD-1. And then the system tolerates the enemy and can live, with HIV 10 years in absence of medication as a mean. And then if you wake up the cell, the body can fight, but too much fight can lead to cytokine storm and too much inflammation. So we have to, there is a quantity, there is a level of waking up, not too much, but enough to try to eat out the virus if the virus is seen. So let's see what we did. We did initially 2 years ago a small study with a company, AbbVie, having a new anti-PD-1, but the dose was used at 20 times lower dose than the dose used in cancer. And we treat 10 patients, and 3 of them had a very low control for up to 2 years, below 200 copy, not below 50, but below 200 copy for 2 years out of 10. So it can be a good chance, it can be a light effect on this therapy and was well tolerated. So the study was decided to be expanded worldwide in 8 countries, and that was presented as a late breaker, using that on different groups of patients, including placebo, and people having a B therapy, another one, an antibody that block the alpha 4 beta 7, which is the third receptor of entry for HIV, but is also a homing marker to keep the T cell in the gut, because as you know, every day we eat and the body has to take the food and not the microbe around the food. So you need to have a filter by the immune cell at the gut level, in the small bowel mainly, and then there is a big play. So, and Anthony Fauci, as you know, and monkey model were positive in a monkey model. Anthony Fauci did the study and was a negative study, and the company wanted to make that because they have a new type of alpha 4 beta 7, and then different arm were designed. So either 20 people receive water, 20 people receive the anti-PD-1 level, the same dose as we did in the pilot study. 20 as the alpha 4 beta 7 because it can be a receptor of entry, so then you may block new infection of T cell. And you have also obviously the combo with one dose of alpha 4 beta 7 or double dose at 1,600 milligrams. So you can see 5 arms with one placebo. So let's see the outcome. And you can see the outcome was medium because in violet you see placebo people. So 1 out of 20 was able spontaneously to control HIV despite not being in acute infection or early treated, a regular patient. But you know it's part of 2 or 3% of people who stop in chronic phase may block the virus for at least 1 year by uh, by uh, by chance. And then when you use the immunotherapy, we had only 10%. So that was good, but it's a small good because the change was not 20, 30% as expected from the early pilot phase. And to control viral load over 1,000, which is less appealing on a clinical level for a few months, it was superior with the antibodies and the placebo because it was zero in the placebo, but you can see the outcome was less than expected. Transient, people lost after 6 months control below 1,000, and 1,000 is not the best things you may want to tolerate. Maybe 200 will be much nicer. So it was not the success expected. On a side effect, it was relatively well tolerated. The ethics committee didn't stop the study. However, one patient developed diabetes and some has a transient thyroid inflammation as expected with anti-PD-1 in cancer. Some were reversible, but one has diabetic, and of course, that was not excellent tolerance. So the company decided not to continue in HIV. I think many investigators were disappointed. There is a signal. Of course, the signal is a bit weak. We were expecting more, but still, the company said we are not interested. Other company, long-acting, may take the stage, and we want to withdraw. That was is still not the philosophy of the scientists involved, and we will discuss further from animal study. Just after the presentation, Mirko Piardini, who works in the US, originally from Italy, present a similar study with a combination of anti-PD-1 and interleukin 10, which is close to anti-PD-1. And our group with Sekali showed 15 years ago that the combo at a cell level were better because you act on a downward effect through interleukin 10. But the good idea, you will see, was that they did the study and then they stopped twice. And in our study, we stopped medication once and then see the effect. And you will see with the next presentation slide that if you stop 2 times, you have a much better outcome than if you stop once. So with immunotherapy, including anti-PD-1, the first stop may be a kind of auto vaccine with the virus of the person. Then you cool down, so you bring the virus load and you give time to the immune system to mature, to fully develop, and then you restop. And when you stop twice, you have a much better outcome than if you do once with the combo, and we expect with maybe anti-PD-1 alone. So we learn a bit late, but we learn for future study we may have two heart interruption. Of course, there is ethical dilemmas that we can discuss at the end. So that's the lesson. 2 time heart interruption may do better than one, at least in a macaque model with SIV infection. Let's see in human. So that's the benefits, on a more clear curve. If you stop twice, the yellow line show it's much better than placebo, and it show a very interesting lesson. So if you use antibody now, and you present Doreen in your introduction and Alisa too, broad neutralizing antibody from the past may start to block HIV, of course, during their presence in the body, and is much better than nothing or placebo. And if you combine the two, you have a better outcome. And if you combine three, it can be much even better, but more expensive and more difficult to do. What people who do that dream is to have a vaccine effect. And it is true in other infectious disease than yellow fever. You may have the antibody may teach the cell how to remind the presence of the antibody, but is not yet proven in HIV. There is maybe some hint in a monkey model, but that's where we were before the meeting. So monoclonal antibody works if you give 2 or 3, and the difficulty is when the half-life is gone, so when the antibody is gone, is the viral load come back, it act like a medication, but there is no vaccine effect. And of course, on an economical ground, is not a very good plan. So in human, the Rio study was considered by the journal Nature Medicine one of the most promising clinical trials for years 2026, and the part of the result were presented at CROI, that's Rockefeller and Oxford University, with a very British people. They have a fantastic accent, so you just have pleasure to listen to their perfect English, and you can see that pure English speaker type. And they show also the double heart interruption. And that, I think, for me, the big lesson for immunotherapy. Whatever you do, you may have to start heart twice to let the body learn about the patient virus and to mature. And they did 2 injections and a placebo with 2 times the intervention. And that was presented in different part. And they did heart, and they do 81, so interruption twice. And that, I think, and they give antibody before and during the heart. And what you can see on the top, heart, when they stop once with the placebo in black, so within 2 to 3 weeks or 4 weeks, everyone rebound, with the exception of one who was around 500 viral load, which is nice, but not perfect. When they stop twice, you can see that the viral load was relatively a delay, maybe 6 weeks. And when they stop, try with a post antibody with a delay effect, you can see that nearly half, of course, number are very small, it's very pilot study. Viral load was mainly below 1,000. So for the first time, he may work longer than the half-life of the antibody, but for that we need to stop art twice and not once. I think with the monkey model, with the Rio study, and conversely with the study we did in Montreal and in other countries with AbbVie, we had one stop, and maybe the two stop is better. And they confirm also that people who had a long viral load control have a very strong CD8 response that cool the virus down, brings the virus down. So that was, I think, the main lesson. We need to have interruption twice for future study, and more ethics consideration are needed. For people who are over 35 of years, you may remember that David Ho from New York was called Man of the Year for his discovery of HIV PCR and the way he managed as a migrant from China as a total success for integration in US. That was years ago. And each time you do HIV PCR is due to David Ho, who set up this technique that changed the world of management. And he was also the first who say eat hard and early, that we can do with the good anti-HIV we have now. And at this time, it was more difficult. The theory was true, but the toxicity and the weakness of medication led to drug resistance. So it took years to have good heart and to follow his advice to eat early and hard. So he's not, now he had white hair. That's a kind of old photo. As anyone, including me, people are aging. I didn't imagine in the past, but I can tell you it's true. And
Hi, Dr. Ruti. Sorry to interrupt. You have 1 minute
yeah,
more.
yeah, but that's the end. And
Okay.
you can see that he did a mixture of interleukin 15, and he shows that he can reactivate the virus. He can also reactivate the virus in mouse having human HIV virus with human cell. And also, if he put an activator, the cell may die. So it's a very interesting. It's far from the clinic, but you can see that he can wake up the virus and he can kill the infected cell and not all the cells. So it's very interesting. It's far from clinical application, but once again, he's a genius and he brings this very interesting perspective. And as a new therapy, you can see that we can use also monoclonal antibody with anti-HIV, with lenacapavir, and you can go to a long viral control over time. And next time we can speak about Gilead monster. As you all know, this monster from the river Gilead in Arizona, because from this monster venom, they identified GLP, and GLP, the Ozempic medication, may have extra fat, extra diabetic effect that may involve the immune system. But for that, we may need another conference. And there is a hot topic because it's also put by the US education system as a priority for people living with HIV. We may improve their metabolic syndrome, but also what we do research now on their immune fight and their immune system. And I thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Ruti. That was a real packed, really, really in-depth session. I think we heard about the HIV reservoir. It still remains a major challenge in the cure landscape. It's just like trying to find a needle in a haystack. So the HIV reservoir, in layman terms, is how the virus stores itself in a way that the immune system cannot differentiate it from itself. And that's how it survives and remains in the body. It still remains a major challenge in the cure research space. We've heard that they have found new markers to help define the size. There are still different strategies being looked into, viral strategies targeting the reservoir, cellular strategies, boosting the immune function to control the virus. And we may need a combination of both for an effective cure, hopefully. And then there are several strategies to boost HIV-specific immune responses to ensure ART-free viral control. And then the hot topic on GLP-1 that may have more benefits on the immune function of people living with HIV. So that was a really packed discussion. Thank you so much. And we'll delve into questions shortly after. So right now, I'll be handing over to Dr. Gabriela, who will tell us where we are realistically on a path towards an HIV cure, and how can people living with HIV meaningfully engage in HIV cure research. Blowing the horns for Dr. Gabriela, she's recognized as one of South Africa's 200 young South Africans by Mail and Guardian in 2025. She's also a clinician researcher at the forefront of pediatric HIV cure research in South Africa. She's a rock star. She's my friend, and I'm a huge fan. Over to you, Dr. Gabi.
Well, good afternoon, everyone from Durban, South Africa, and thank you, Lisa, for the very kind introduction. Just as a note, you might hear my little puppy making some noise in the background. I apologize for that. He does like attention. So I am very excited to be here, and thank you to Dr. Ruti for a great overview, particularly around what's happening, in basic science and in terms of adult cure-related research that was presented at CROI. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to have a PowerPoint, but I'm just going to talk through some of the things that I thought were really exciting. And as Lisa may have mentioned, I am particularly focused in terms of pediatric HIV cure work. And so I'm going to focus on that. And then if there's time, and Lisa, feel free to kind of give me an idea what my time's looking like. But if there's time, then I will also just give some notes on some other things that I thought were quite interesting in terms of what has been presented at CROI this year. So first of all, it was really exciting to have two studies, both based in sub-Saharan Africa, presenting results of cure studies in children. And these were presented this year at CROI. And one of them was actually our cohort, so I presented the results. And then the other was from the Tetelo study, which is based in Botswana. And so I'm going to talk through quickly in terms of our study and our results and everything. And then I'm going to speak about the Tetelo Plus study as well. And then if there's time, then I'll add. But so basically, I want to kind of take everyone back, because I know that not everyone necessarily attending this webinar will have been in some of the earlier webinars and understand some of the background, particularly with regards to pediatrics. So children are thought to have the potential to be able to cure HIV more easily than adults. And this came about because there was a child, and you may have heard of this case, called the Mississippi baby. And this was a child in Mississippi in America, and the child was born with HIV and was started on ARVs very, very early, literally within hours of being born. And this child carried on treatment and then was lost to follow-up for an extended period. Thereafter, the child was brought back in and was found to have an undetectable viral load despite having been off of therapy. And this prompted a lot of questions. So what we were able to see, and this child did eventually rebound, but what we were able to see was that when you are able to start ART early in life, you are able to limit the size and the diversity of the viral reservoir, which is the thing that makes HIV quite so difficult to cure. We can treat it really well, but the reservoir is the thing that makes it really difficult to cure. And so you can have a much smaller one and that's less diverse, which means that in theory, it would be easier for a skilled immune system to be able to control it later. So what we did in response to this case was we started a cohort of children. Hang on a second, let me just stop my dog from barking. Apologies for that. So what we did is we started a cohort of very early treated children in South Africa. So South Africa has a really high prevalence of people living with HIV, and KwaZulu-Natal is one of the areas where there is an incredibly high prevalence of HIV. And so we started this cohort of children, so they are born with HIV, and we start them on ART by 21 days of life. And we follow them going forward. And our cohort this year, the oldest children in the cohort are 11 years old. And we have walked the journey from birth to 11 with them, and we continue to walk that path with them. And in terms of our youngest kids, we are still enrolling. So 21 days old is our youngest one. And so the idea was to see whether more children could be like the Mississippi baby and have these periods where the immune system could control the HIV without any ART. And so we were able to identify in a previous part of our study where 5 boys were able to control HIV without ART on board, but this was in an unscheduled treatment interruption. So they stopped their treatment without any proper oversight and without us knowing. And we were able to see that, in fact, they were able to control the HIV. And this is something that we spoke about at previous conferences. But what that prompted within us was then an idea to stop the treatment in certain children within our cohort. And now remembering, we have incredibly strict eligibility criteria to be able to stop treatment. And this specific kind of study is called an analytical treatment interruption. And I'm sure many of you will have heard of an ATI before. So that's what's referred to when we talk about an ATI. And it basically means that treatment, ART, is stopped under very, very strict monitoring and safety. And people are followed up really, really often. And every precaution in terms of safety is undertaken. But what we do is we follow these children up after we have stopped their treatment, and we see whether they rebound. And if they rebound, we restart them on treatment. And so what we were able to show is we enrolled 19 children in this analytical treatment interruption, and 32% of these children were able to maintain undetectable viral loads for more than 12 weeks. So that might just sound like a bunch of statistics, but when you put that in context, when you look at adults and adult ATI studies, 96%, well, between 94 and 96% of adults have rebounded by 12 weeks within adult ATIs. So the fact that, we have this 32% who haven't rebounded is incredibly significant. And what we were able to do is within these children, we were then able to look at, okay, what are our similarities? What are our differences in terms of the children themselves, their immune systems, and the viruses? And what we were able to see is that the viruses that were transmitted to them, which is your transmitter founder virus, they had specific characteristics that made them more able to be controlled by that child's immune system. And so this is something that echoed our findings from our previous article where we found the 5 males. So in this study, we identified an additional 3 children who were able to control HIV beyond 12 weeks without ART, which is really exciting. And so that's the next phase in terms of that is then going on to a broadly neutralizing antibody trial, which hopes to elicit a kind of immune response that further allows the immune system to be able to control the HIV in the absence of ART. So with that in mind, I'm now going to move on to the other study that was presented in the same session, which was the Totelo Plus study. And this was presented by Dr. Ajibola and is based in Botswana. It's also a very early treated cohort. And what they did is their children were very much the similar profile to ours in that they were early treated and followed up over long periods. And they got administered broadly neutralizing antibodies, and they got 3 of them. And these children, while this was an interim kind of report of what's happening, it was great to see that it could be safely done, that these kinds of trials can be done in an African setting and done well. And yeah, so there were 12 kids, and they received 3 broadly neutralizing antibodies, and 10 maintain undetectable viral loads at this point. And then, but we know that at this point where they gave the report at CROI, they were still had the antibodies were still active in the system, which means they were kind of acting as a kind of ART, right? A kind of treatment or suppressing the virus itself. However, the next phase, when they're going to present the next lot of results, is what's going to be really exciting, because that's when the broadly neutralizing antibodies will have worn off. And then we'll see, can these children's immune systems control the HIV now that they've been exposed and primed by these antibodies, but use their immune systems to elicit undetectable viral loads and what we call ART-free remission. So I know that that was quite a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I think the exciting thing is that this research is ongoing, and it's ongoing in a sub-Saharan African setting, where, you know, the most number of children living with HIV are based. And there is state-of-the-art research going on, and they're encouraging results, and we're moving towards further broadly neutralizing antibody studies and looking more also at the mechanisms, because if we can understand why specific children with specific viruses are able to control, we can then figure out a way to recreate that in other children, and that in future we hope will be able to be translated for adults as well. So I'm not going to go into anything else because I know our time is limited, but I'm going to close with that, and yeah, ask for
Thank you,
any
Gavin.
questions or anything.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you
Lisa.
so much. I think towards the end there, you kind of answered a question that was thrown at you. Like, how is the pediatric cure research related to decreasing the reservoir different from elite controllers in adults? So would you like to add more to that, or would you say you've done justice to that question already?
So I think I'm going to give part of an answer, and I kind of spoke around it in a way, but I think what's really important always is to remember that children are not little adults. That is, if that's the one thing that you take away from this, it's that that's the reason we are doing cure research in children and we're doing cure research in adults, because it differs, right? A child, you can't take a dose of medication and make it less and think it's going to work, because children's bodies metabolize medication in a different way to adults. All sorts of things are different. Their immune systems are different. So you can't really say, oh, how is this different in a child versus an adult, because they're almost completely different in terms of how their bodies are functioning. And as you age as well, different things in your immune system change, and that affects what happens with the HIV and your ability to control it as well, right? So what's quite interesting is that when you think about elite controllers and people who are able to be in ART-free remission in adults, that's a majority of females, right? But when you look at children, and in our cohort in particular, the majority is males. And so we see that sex definitely has a role to play. And we know that sex is not, just male and female. We know that. But we are able to see that the sex hormones and the way that the immune systems work, and we still starting to understand more about that, but that can also influence how the virus can be controlled in terms of our immune system. And so there are all sorts of layers to this and angles that are working together. And I think that kind of, highlights what we already know, in that we're probably going to need a sort of multi-pronged approach. And when we're looking at cure, it's never just going to be one thing in terms of a concept. It's going to be multiple things working together: immune system, virus, age, etc. Right? So yeah, I'm going to end there.
Thanks, Gabby. Thank you so much for that great session. And I think whilst we're learning as we go, we keep learning. And even studies like Dr. Ruti presented, studies which don't give us the results we were expecting, still give us valuable lessons. So no study is a waste, and every study has valuable lessons to it. So now we'll be moving on to innovations in HIV prevention. I'll be handing it over to Gaston. Gaston has been living with HIV for over 10 years. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina, and currently serves as the community engagement representative in the research department at Font. I can't really pronounce that, Gaston. I hope you pronounce it for us. And he's also a founding member of La Cora, the Latin American and Caribbean HIV Cure Consortium. So over to you, Gaston. At CROI 2026, what prevention innovations stood out to you the most? There were a lot of exciting things presented, both in the pipeline and other clinical research going on. And how close are we to seeing this innovation reach the community in the real world setting?
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm going to be very brief, but I don't want to stop thanking also Doreen and the GMP Plus team for the invitation to participate, and also fellow panelists. Answering to your question, I think that one of the most impactful prevention innovations at CROI was long-acting PrEP, particularly lenacapavir as a potential twice-yearly option. I mean, we know that this is something that can be transformative, especially for people facing challenges with daily adherence, and also for those who want to expand their choice alternatives, and those who need that burden reduction. But something that we've also seen highlighted is the critical reality that even like existing PrEP alternatives are not reaching sufficient scale. Something that was particularly shocking to me was this estimation that around 42 people are needed to be on PrEP to prevent just one new infection per year. And this is the level that most countries have not achieved. And I can certainly say so for my own country, Argentina, in which we barely have one person in PrEP per new infection. And this is something that we know is worsening due to funding cuts. And this raises, of course, concerns about the rollout of new tools, because while the science is advancing quickly, as we know, access is also likely to be delayed and uneven, particularly in a region like Latin America and the Caribbean, which is where I'm from, due to, of course, affordability, regulatory barriers, and limited health system capacity. There is also a risk that innovations like lenacapavir will initially benefit only a few countries, further widening these inequities. And this is particularly relevant for middle income countries like mine, which are expected, of course, to lead implementation without any financial or technical support, and also having participated in the trials that made this science happen. So, from a community perspective, I think that the promise may be clear, but the impact will depend, of course, on early and intentional planning for equitable access, because without it, new tools risk not only not reaching those who need them in the most timely way, but also being left out as just a promise.
Thank you so much, Gaston, and I couldn't agree more. It's exciting to see that the science is moving, but without backing the science with real access, then everything is just wasted. If these innovations cannot get into the hands of the people who need them the most, then what are we doing? And just to add to some of your thoughts, I think a major key highlight that struck me, or a key message, was it's important to consider regional or cross-country access. But even within countries, we also need to ensure that different populations have equal access. There's equitable rollout across populations, because in the rollout or in the clinical trials for some of these long-acting innovations, some populations, like people who inject drugs, have been historically left behind. So we also need to ensure that across populations, across geographies, we're ensuring equitable rollout of these products. And now we'll be delving into HIV treatment, where we'll be hearing from Shari Margolis. Shari has over 30 years experience as a community engagement expert. It was an honor to meet Shari at CROI in person. As a person with lived experience and a treatment and cure advocate, she's a longtime member and contributor to many community organizations, including CATI and the Canadian AIDS Society. She has been engaged with CanCure for over 10 years, and she's a recent CROI scholar and a recipient of the Canadian Association of HIV Researchers Red Ribbon Award. So over to you, Shari. What were the most important updates on HIV treatment from CROI 2026 that the people living with HIV should know about today?
Good morning. Well, it's morning for me here in Canada. It's 7:56 a.m. So thank you for everyone coming out today, and it's wonderful to see you all here. You're going to hear a lot of repeated messages from me that Gaston brought forward, because the same issues are cascading from prevention to cure. But the biggest takeaway from CROI this year is that HIV treatment is definitely moving towards more flexibility and more personalization. So we now have, as everyone's mentioned, long-acting options like injectable cabotegravir and I always trip on that one. Rilpivirine, which are every 2 months, and lenacapavir every 6 months for some people. And research is already pointing towards the possibility of once a year treatment. We're also seeing progress in simplifying treatment for people who've been on HIV meds for decades, and especially those that are managing multi-drug class resistance or multiple medications. That's definitely true for a lot of long-term survivors. But I think it's really important to pause on the word choice. So while we talk about more options, many people living with HIV, even in Canada, in high income countries, still don't have meaningful treatment choice at all. Access depends on where you live, on what's covered, and whether systems are stable. And Gaston touched on that a little bit. And that's where the broader context really matters, is that we're seeing political funding gaps, war conflict in some regions, where even maintaining basic treatment has been a challenge. So there's really a growing gap between what's scientifically possible, which is a lot, and what's actually reaching people. And that's why we can't really lose sight of the importance of cure and vaccine research. Because as long as access is uneven, we need solutions that don't rely on lifelong, perfectly supported treatment systems. So I'm going to talk more about long-acting therapies when you ask me my next question, unless you want me to go into that now.
Yes, yes. Feel free to go into
Go
that.
ahead. Okay. So I was also asked about the long-acting therapies. So long-acting therapies are exciting, and for some people, they can really be life-changing. Moving from a daily pill or a daily three pill or twice a day regimen every day to an injection every few months can really reduce pill fatigue, stigma, and the daily reminder of HIV, which can improve the quality of people's lives and their mental health. But it's not one size fits all. Some people prefer the control of a daily pill like Biktarvy. I'm not sure what you call it in other countries, but that's the brand name. Others may find it difficult to attend regular clinic visits for injections. I can attest to that even here. I live 300 kilometers from my HIV specialist, and currently, although long-acting therapies may be available here, I can't really reliably attend an appointment on time. There'll be no more FaceTime appointments. That won't be acceptable anymore. And until we can bring access to local communities to be able to access through your local primary care provider or pharmacist, it's going to be unattainable for a lot of people, even in high income countries. So they could be dealing with transport issues and unstable healthcare access in other countries as well. So this is a really important. There's also a really important nuance, and this is called a long tail, and I can explain that more. These long-acting drugs stay in the body for months, and if someone misses care, there's a very short window to get your second injection or your every 2 month injection. So there's a risk window there where resistance can develop. So adherence doesn't really disappear when you switch to the concern of adherence doesn't disappear when you switch from a once a day regimen to a every 2 months or every 6 months. It just shifts. Instead of remembering a pill every day, you have to be able to stay consistently connected to care. So we are starting to see broader conversations about whole person health, though, and I was really excited to see that. For example, medications, and Dr. Rudy touched on this, like semaglutide, which is the GLP-1, or people know it as Ozempic, are being discussed in the context of HIV care, not as a treatment for HIV, but as part of managing weight and cardiovascular health as people age. This could be very important for women, especially on long-acting treatments. We learned that women have a higher volume of medication in their systems, and they have some different side effects, including weight gain, which can lead to cardiovascular issues. So I think that this is really important. And so I guess what I'd like to say to end that part, and then I can certainly add more along or more detail in the questions, is that treatment is evolving beyond viral suppression, which is great. So we're looking at the whole person towards something more sustainable and livable. But again, all of this depends on access. Availability does not equal access. And I think that's something we always have to be very conscious of. And long-acting therapies require infrastructure in settings affected by funding, instability, or conflict. Those systems can break down very quickly, as we've seen over the last year or two. And so while these advances offer more freedom for some, they also risk widening inequities if we're not really careful. I'll end there so others can go, and then I have more information. I'm happy to share more detail, answer questions.
Thank you so much, Shari. I think you really touched on all the points, and we're really grateful to hear about choice, about the new long-acting therapies, and the advances in HIV treatment. So I think right now we'll delve into Q&As. We have like 30 minutes before the end of the session, so we'll delve into Q&As now. There was one question in the chat box. What role do community members and advocates need to play in shaping future HIV cure research so that it remains ethical, accessible, and grounded in lived experience? And thanks, Randy, for that really important question. Gaston, do you want to take a stab, or do I go ahead?
Go ahead and I'll chime in. Sorry, I thought that we were finishing on the top of the hour, but go
Oh,
ahead.
okay.
I can take that, Elisa, if you like.
Okay, I can just chime in.
I can take that question.
Okay, Shari, you can, and then I'll add my thoughts to it.
Okay, so I can give you some examples, some real world examples. I've been working with the Canadian Cure Enterprise CanCure, so with Dr. Nicolas Chaumont, who many of you met at CROI, and Dr. Ruti. Um, we like to think of community as infrastructure, not an accessory to our work. So, and what all of our community advisory board members, there's just a small number of us because we wanted to make sure that it's people who are really passionate about cure and that we have good representation from different population groups. But we are all members of the Can Cure team. We're not the Can Cure team cab. We're listed on the grant. All of us, number one. That's number one. So we were all involved in looking at every single project, even though it's basic science and it's hard to learn, it's complex. Basic science, right from the very beginning, talking about, impact and relevance, right from the start before we even submitted the grant. Now, every single month, we have scientific update meetings. Every one of our CAB members attends those scientific update meetings and is able to input and communicate and correspond directly with the scientists that are doing the work. And believe me, we've made changes, especially looking at sex and gender, looking at ethnicity. These things are important when it comes comes to even basic science, and that's what most of cure is. The other thing is that we've taken an opportunity to work really closely with trainees and scientists by creating a buddy system. And I'll be presenting this actually. I can still talk about it briefly. I'll be presenting this in Rio. We developed a buddy system where we pair community members with our scientific scientists. Some are postdocs, some are trainees, some are early scientists. Even Dr. Rudy is a science buddy. So we also have, big shot scientists. And when we go to conferences, we ensure that the community members are going with a science buddy to scientific sessions so that they can translate them in real time. But we do more than that. And this is what I think is really different than a lot of other programs, is that our science buddies are also required at different conferences to attend community or social science sessions with their community buddies choosing, so that they really have an opportunity to meet people living with HIV and working in the community and develop relationships over a long period of time and understand what people living with HIV are actually going through, because there's many scientists on the bench, young ones especially, who've never met a person living with HIV, yet they're working on they've met their cells. So those are the kinds of ways that here in Canada that we're working to ensure that communities really engaged in cure research. And I really believe it's quite transferable around the world to do this kind of work. And Dr. Rudy can certainly comment on what it's like from the science side for this kind of engagement.
Yeah, Shari.
Also,
Yeah, at the beginning is a bit odd because we were in the past in a kind of competition. They were against some study. We we feel, oh, maybe the study won't be accepted by the committee that was done also by the CTN and other federal organization. And then things changed probably 10 years ago, where we get information, new things, and we please now. But it was not spontaneous. It didn't occur spontaneously. It was from disagreement, but still talk. And then we learn and we co-evolve. And I think that's take time. There is a curve. It's not immediate. It's not nothing is perfect. But we also have the high quality community members that play a role also, and their ability to see more globally what we focus on one objective. There is a bigger issue, and also with one study to try to have the psychological, the economical, the community impact, and sometimes doesn't require much structure because we may have one funded study, and then if we add on some ancillary, the term is maybe not nice, but other study link with the main study, which is can be science, then we can do even more, and our work got more impactful effect. And I think now it's very nice, but it's a learning curve.
But I think if you really think about it, it's a matter of just shaping the science because mainly when people think about the role of the community in research, they perhaps what they think of at the beginning is helping the community get the content translated into plain language that anyone can understand, but and that often like forsakes that it's actually a two-way process because also the community members that are engaged in this process is also serve as catalyzers for as you were saying, Dr. Ruti, like not only the community needs but everything that goes into like real life settings, which it isn't just about subjectivity and psychological issues, but societal barriers, financing, and things that perhaps sometimes we think that go beyond what science is, but that make up science, and that's something that is always quite welcome to see that in a space like CROI, which to our understanding is so like basic science, like hard stuff and like macrophages and the things that you see on the microscope that you get to see in those spaces because it is something that's of course cross-cutting, but perhaps to add my 5 cents, it also has to do with multi-sectorial collaboration. That's something that require sustained engagement from all the different silos that work in the HIV response. And these spaces are where priorities are aligned, where ethical standards are strengthened, and where pathways to access begin to take shape, especially if they happen early in. But also, truth be told, these platforms in which we all get together are increasingly under pressure as global health cooperation becomes more fragmented, as money dissolves. There's like a natural risk of reverting to these approaches that like disconnect science from the reality of not only implementation but of lived experience.
I think Gabriela had the question.
It wasn't a question. It's just more of a comment, and it's so great to hear, about how you guys work with your cabs and how incredibly integrated your system is. It's really exciting to hear. And I just wanted to say that, in general, we need to think about the fact that we don't want to have a cure that's sitting on a shelf one day because it's not something that the local community who is affected by HIV, it's not contextually appropriate, right? And that's why it's so important that from the beginning we have community members, advocates, part of this process. And as I said, just incredible to hear about what's happening in Canada. And I think you know there is great work happening on the African continent as well. Some really exciting community work, and I would just like to encourage people who are on this webinar as well. If you're interested, you know, the HIV response itself was pushed through advocacy, and coming from a country where we had a period of AIDS denialism and people were not able to access ART for a very, very long time, you know, to now being a country that has the biggest, most impressive ART rollout system. These things are possible, but it requires community, scientists, and policymakers to all come together to work towards the same goal. And I think that, you know, there are people within prevention, there are people within treatment, there are people within the cure aspects of HIV work. And we all work on a continuum, right? We all are working towards the same thing. And so I encourage scientists to improve their scientific communication. I ask that advocates and community members, you know, make it their business to ask difficult questions and to be part of programs in their communities and at scientific conferences. So I think there are so many ways that you can be part of this. And I just, yeah, it's just really exciting to hear about what is going on globally.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for that really critical question. I can see how everyone is passionate about that because the community is a really important aspect of research. Everything we're doing is for the community. And on a global level, I know IAS, AVAC, they have an academy where I myself learned about HIV cure, where I met Dr. Gabriella and most of the scientists as well. The community has the role to really engage with the science, improve literacy, stop misinformation. Misinformation is a major issue we are facing right now. And also shape research agendas as well. And on this note, I think we'll call it a wrap of this call. Thank you, everyone, for being so passionate. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for sharing all the valuable lessons from CROI. We hope that you take these messages back to your community. You break down the science, you ensure that everyone is carried along as we move together and work together as one towards ending HIV as a public health threat in 2030, hopefully, fingers crossed. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Ruti. Thanks, Shari. Thanks, Gabby. And thanks, Gaston. And Doreen, over to you and the GMP Plus family. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this amazing afternoon, for your insights, for sharing with us the new science. Most of the times when we learn some of these things in scientific conferences, they remain there and they don't come back home to the community. And that is what we're trying to bring up to the community and tell them, hey, this is what is happening. The research is working. Things are happening behind the scenes. So that one day when there is a cure, people don't say, we did not know. We were not involved in this thing. We didn't understand. So we need, for any new technology that is coming up, for us to have conversations with the community, because it's not just a matter of availability, it's also a matter of access and also having information around it. So thank you to everybody who's joined us. Thank you to my amazing panelists. This conversation has been recorded, so it's definitely going to be on our YouTube channel, so you can share it among your communities for people who missed out today. And we shall continue with more conversations. I think we're having another conversation next week. But one, I think, but it's also another community convening just like this one. So continue following GNP Plus and the work that we do and the conversations that we are having with the communities. Thank you so much.
Doreen,
Yes,
how did we do?
we did well. So far, so good. We even ended a little bit earlier.
Okay, okay. Okay, that's great. I'm happy to join next time.
Yeah. Okay, let me stop recording.